So for this chapter, we're going to be looking at compositing multiple images together. And before we start, I want to talk about a preset first, and then talk about some of the different ways that you can bring multiple images into one file. So let's go to Edit, Preferences, General. And notice there's an option here where it says resize image during place. Now, depending on the size of your images, this might be a really good thing to do. What I want to do is turn it off first, and then let's start a file so that I can show you what's going to happen when that's off. So if I choose File, I'm going to open the main image file that I want to use for this composition called Barn. So here's the main image that we're going to start with. And if we go to Image and Image Size, you can see here that it's 18 by 1200 pixels and the resolution is 300. Whenever you're combining images, whatever you bring into a particular file will automatically change. So if this is 300 ppi and you bring in something that's 72 ppi, the 72 ppi will automatically convert to 300 ppi, which means it might shrink quite a bit in that conversion process. The other thing that's going to change is if this image is in RGB and you bring in something that's CMYK, it will also convert that to RGB. So you don't necessarily need to go through all of your files and change them before you bring them in, but in some ways I recommend it because often when you're changing color modes or changing resolution, sometimes things can happen that might surprise you. And it might be easier to deal with each of those files individually one at a time than waiting to see what happens when you bring it in. However, you do have to get it into this file, and you can deal with it after you bring it in. So it'll be up to you to choose which workflow you think works best for you. Same thing with the placing that I'm going to show you, because the placing can be different also. You can have that resize checked or not checked. So right now that resize is not checked. So if I bring in an image that's 300 ppi but a larger size than this image, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to place, I'm going to go ahead and place it embedded because my file is not too large. If I bring in these clouds here, notice it brings them in at a size larger than the original image. Now, it's 100% of the real size. Now, this isn't too much larger than the original image, and I can still reach these handles, these corner boxes. So if I want to scale it, I can get the corner and hold the Shift key and scale the image. If I want to, I don't necessarily have to. Okay, so that's an option for me. In order to keep the realism of the clouds, I might want to actually leave this image the size that it is that it came in. But just be aware that those transform handles can be way out here. Now, another thing that can happen is up here at the top, where it has the width and the height, this is where I look to see if I'm looking at the actual size of the pixels. So I can come back later and type in a different percentage for what size I want this image to be. And I'm just going to do it right now so that you can see. Now, the first thing you should always do when you have a pixel image is lock this aspect ratio here so that if you change the width, the height changes to the same amount. So if I type in 75 here, you can see that I've changed the size of the image and it kept the right aspect ratio. However, now it's too small. If I was going to use these clouds to replace the clouds in the back of the image, it's going to be too small. Now, however, because when you place into Photoshop, this is a smart object, even though I've scaled it smaller, I can always take it back out to 100%. So if I do Control T to transform the size. Notice I get my options back up here. It still recognizes that it's at 75%, and if I want to change it back to 100%, I can simply make sure it's locked and type in 100%. Now, I'm not sure why that link or lock on the aspect ratio keeps defaulting to be turned off, because there's hardly any time in Photoshop that you want to distort a photo. It just looks unnatural and unreal. So you'll have to remember each time to go back and type the number that you want and make sure that the link has been turned on. Okay, so now I have two images going on here, and I want to bring in some other images that I want to use. So for those images, I'm also going to do File Place. But before I do that, I'm going to edit the preferences again. And this time I'm going to check that I do want to resize the image during place so that you can see what happens. So this time, if I choose File Place, Embedded. Now I'm embedding because my file size is not going to be over 2 gigabytes, and I would like all of my layers to be in one file, and I don't want to have to worry about linking. But you could use linking if you're working with very large files and you want to keep your document more nimble. So let's see, I also want to bring in this field here. Let's bring that in. So here's a field. I asked it to bring it in at a scaled size, a size that fits within the size of my document. And notice when I did that, it brought it in at 45%. And if I want to put it back on 100%, I can first of all lock the aspect ratio and then type in 100%. And now you can see how the bounding box is way larger than the actual image. And to get to the corners, what I need to do is hold down the Control or Command key and then hit the minus sign on the keyboard. And that will zoom out so that I can find those corners and rescale if I need to. But it depends on what I want to do with this file. I might want to actually leave this at 100% because that's going to give me a more realistic view. Now, because it's a smart object and I can resize it later, let's see, I think I'll leave it the full size that it is. So I'm just going to accept this by clicking on the check mark, and I'll go ahead and leave it just like it is. And let me get a couple of other files. I'm going to choose Place Embedded. And I have this other land here that I want to bring in. So I have one more file that I want to bring in now. So I'm going to go to File, Place, Embedded, and we'll get this texture and choose Place. Okay, so here are my layers that I want to be working with for this particular document. The next thing I want to do is do a file, Save As, to save this as a working document. So I'll leave it named Barn, but I'm going to name it Working. And then I'm also going to put a number 1 because this is my first revision. And then I'll go ahead and choose Save. So that's a little bit about bringing multiple files into one document.